You know, January feels like one of those months where it feels like you've partied really hard and then you wake up the next morning and you're kind of feeling like shit. It's not really hungover because, well, I've never actually been hungover, but if you've been hungover, it probably feels like that. January was an interesting month and it went by really, really fast, but I actually had a pretty good reading year, so let's get into it. Hello, everyone. Britton here, also known as Samoki Dude, and I'm back here today with a What I Read, which is basically my reading wrap-ups. I just don't call them reading wrap-ups. I'm a stubborn bastard, what do you want me to say? So, yeah, I read 5 books this month. I didn't read any comics, unfortunately, because, well, I didn't really... I didn't really have the itch to read any so far right now, but I did read a couple of books, and I'm going to share them with you today. I got my Dr. Pepper. I have all these books here. I'm good to go. First book I have here today is one that my buddy Jason Furman at Jason Furman told me about, and that is Kham Stiff. This is one of those books that Jason was going goo-goo over and was telling me to he was telling me to read it. So, what did I think of Kham Stiff? I had actually heard from a couple of writers I like that this is a good book. Stephen Graham Jones really likes this book. Also, you see Chuck Palahniuk right here. He really liked this book. So, what did I think of Kham Stiff? I liked it a lot. I think it's a really well done collection of short stories, but it's also kind of what Liam would call a fix-up novel of sorts. It's basically about a town, which is a real place, called Kham Stiff, Ohio. But I enjoyed this book a lot. I don't know if I really see the magic in it, as Jason says, but this is a very solid, very dependable storytelling from somebody who I am shocked that this was his first book. I mean, from when you read this, you'll feel like this guy has been writing for years. He is a phenomenal at just creating mood. He's great at creating atmosphere, and he's also great at creating these really disturbing, weird, freakish characters, a la Cormac McCarthy or even, well, the aforementioned Chuck Palahniuk. I've heard him be compared to McCarthy, though he doesn't quite have the dark poeticism of Cormac McCarthy. He's much more grounded in reality, unlike Cormac McCarthy, where it almost feels like you're in another world, even though you're in our world. But I really like this book a lot. The stories in here are really strong. I was never bored when reading this. There's a lot of really dark, tragic stories. There's also some pretty hilarious stories in this. You'll also be grossed out. So if you have a weak constitution, I would not recommend reading Kham Stiff. But for the rest of you who can handle that stuff, I highly recommend Kham Stiff. I thought it was a pretty damn good book, and I might have a discussion with Jason about it at some point. I don't know when or when that's ever going to happen. Sometime soon. I don't know when that's going to be. I don't have it planned at the moment. But I'm definitely hoping to talk about this with Jason at some point, and I do recommend it. I think it's a solid read. So yeah, Kham Stiff. There we go. So my favorite book of this month was My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I had actually read the sample of Amazon of this book before I read this, and once I started reading this book, it was really hard for me to put it down. This book is a deeply compelling, darkly heartbreaking story of a young girl who meets a rather magnetic English teacher when she's in high school, and, well, you can imagine where it goes. This book is very much a response to one of my favorite novels, Lolita, which, for my money, is one of the greatest novels ever written in the English language. And My Dark Vanessa really leans into the comparisons of Lolita. There's even parts where the main character, Vanessa, is actually reading Lolita. And also, the lines in this first book are actually a reference to another Nabokov work, Pale Fire. I won't say too much because I'm going to make a review of this book soon, but I thought this book was great. It's well written. It's really evocative without being too poetic. Sadly, I wouldn't say, if you're looking for Lolita, this is not Lolita. This is a different story. The style is very different. I mean, if you are wanting Nabokov's wit and playful linguistics, you probably won't get it from My Dark Vanessa. But I really enjoyed reading this book. Well, I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but I really appreciated this novel. I think that Kate Elizabeth Russell is a really talented writer. and you guys should check out this book. If you like Lolita, I think you'll appreciate this book a lot, like I did. Or if you're more cynical, you'll just say it's not as good. So, I don't know what to tell you. There's some people you just can't please. Next book I have here is All Things Left Wild by James Wade. I have barely seen anybody cover this book on the YouTube sphere. I haven't even seen anyone really cover this author. I've looked up James Wade on YouTube, and I just see a bunch of interviews with him by other people. But I really liked All Things Left Wild. I think this was a pretty strong book. If you're a fan of Cormac McCarthy, pick this book up. It's very reminiscent of Cormac McCarthy. If I could describe this book in like elevator pitch terms, it's basically like if Cormac McCarthy wrote True Grit. There's more heart in this book than a McCarthy novel, and you could definitely see the McCarthy influence in this book. I think McCarthy, there is a little bit too much of the Cormac McCarthy influence in this book a little bit. I mean, he does kind of take from his style a bit. It's definitely apparent that James Wade has not found his voice yet, which makes sense. This is his first novel. But for a first novel, it was really good, and I was deeply engaged throughout the entirety of it. And the ending that we got, let me just say it knocked my socks off. It really, it was not what I was expecting the ending would be, but it felt fitting to the story. A really good read if you're going through a McCarthy hangover and just want something that's akin to McCarthy, but feels just different enough where you can enjoy yourself. But yeah, it's basically True Grit McCarthy style. It's really good. Check it out. Let me get a drink real quick. Next book I have here is a bit of an old school fantasy. My buddy John from Talking Story turned me on to this one, and oh dear, I almost dropped it. That would have been embarrassing. But the book I have here is Kagan the Damned by Jonathan Marbury. This is my first Jonathan Marbury book, and I was really attracted to this book because Michael Moorcock is blurbed right here, and also it seems like it's an old school throwback to Sword and Sorcery. If you're a big fan of Conan, Elric, other stuff of that sort, you will dig the shit out of Kagan the Damned. Though I will warn you, as John likes to say, get all the trigger warnings. This book is absolutely insane. There is a lot of violence. There's a lot of sex in this, which isn't too bad. And then there's a lot of sexual violence, which is really bad. I was pretty mixed on this book. It does get a little expository in times, but there was also a lot of stuff I really liked. The characterization was solid, and I also really loved that they added the Lovecraftian mythos to this series, because I have always really wanted to see a Lovecraftian epic fantasy, and Marbury, I guess, really wanted to write that, and he finally did, and I'm really glad that he did, because all the references to Lovecraft, as well as the Cthulhu mythos, is really well done in this. There are some stuff in this that, might turn some people off, but I enjoyed this book. I thought it was solid. I don't think it's a perfect book. Like I said, I had a lot of issues. I had some issues with it, particularly how much sexual violence was in this book. Now, I know I sound like a rube right now, but it wasn't. I wasn't a fan. And also, again, it did get a little expository there from time to time. But I thought Kagan the Damned was a pretty solid read. It's a lot of fun. If you really like old school sword and sorcery in the vein of Robert E. Howard, of Fritz Leiber, though it's not as funny as Fritz Leiber, or Michael Moorcock, who is, like I said, right there. He's blurbed. Right there. He's blurbed. So, yeah. Check this book out if you want. I thought it was pretty solid. I might have a conversation with John talking about this book at some point. Not sure yet, but we're trying to figure something out at the moment, because he was the one who turned me on to this book, and he's also a big fan of Jonathan Marbury. He actually had him on his channel for a series called The Artist's Journey, which I thought was a really great conversation. You guys can go check that out. I'll link it down below in the description. But yeah, King the Damned is a really fun book. There's a lot of dark stuff in here, so just be warned. It's not a nice world that the characters live in. But again, solid book. I enjoyed myself. I wouldn't call it one of the best fantasies I've ever read, but good stuff. Last book I read was actually on my phone. It was an ebook that was provided to me by the very kind Andrew D. Meredith, who I actually talked to on my channel. He was my first podcast of this year. Nice dude. Probably one of the smartest writers I've met so far in my journey of hanging out with other writers and talking on Britain's Hangout Hour with him. I'll link that episode down below. There were a couple of whoopsies that sadly there was an hour of that conversation that got cut off because I made some mistakes, but I had a really great time talking to him. And well, what's the book that I'm talking about though? And the book I'm talking about is Thrice by oh dear, Thrice, which is right there. So there you go, by Andrew D. Meredith. This was a book that intrigued me because it has one of my favorite tropes, which is the badass guy and the kid walking around going to stuff. I liked it. I don't know if I was in the right mood to read it because I remember I was kind of, there were times I kind of felt like I had to read it at points. But what I will say is the book, what I did read, I really enjoyed a lot. And I thought it was a really clever take on the badass guy and kid duo. And it's a trope that I really enjoy. I think Andrew has a very confident voice as an author, which I really liked. There were some issues I had here and there. I mean, there are points where it just feels like Leaf and Hoven, I think is the guy's name, are just kind of bouncing around, which I think is kind of the point, but, it doesn't always make for great reading. And there were times I felt that the dialogue was a little too formal for my taste. Like, there were points I was kind of like, do people talk like that? But I digress. I thought it was a pretty good novel nonetheless. Solid stuff, good storytelling. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Joven and Leaf, which is the kid's name. And of course, I really like how Thrice is a motif throughout the story. There's, Thrice means 3 times. If you didn't know that already. But I really like the theatricality of Andrew Meredith's stuff. And I also enjoyed reading, also enjoyed the characters he created. He creates some pretty interesting, fun characters that you really grow to like. And he also does things that you don't expect to happen, but they end up happening. And there's a lot of really fun twists and turns throughout the story. But I enjoyed myself while reading Thrice. But again, I don't know if I was in the right mood when I was reading it, because there were times I was kind of, it's kind of meh on it. But I think, again, I think it was because my heart wasn't fully into reading it. I don't know if it was necessarily because of what Andrew was writing. But what I read, my point is, book I read, I enjoyed it. I thought Thrice was a pretty good novel, and I do hope to read the second one at some point. But I actually want to reread the first book as well. Also, it probably didn't help that I read it on my phone in ebook, and I'm not used to reading ebooks, so that really discombobulated me a bit. But aside from all the hiccups from reading Thrice, I liked Thrice a lot, and I would recommend it to you all. I mean, I thought it was a pretty good self-pub read. And that was one of my goals this year, was to read more self-pub books. So that reminds me, if any of you guys have any self-pub books that you want to recommend to me, by all means, let me know in the comments section. I mean, I already have some on my list. I have The Legend of Blackjack on my list. I have Joe's book, Wistful Ascending, on my list. I have a couple of other books on the list, but if any of you have any self-pub book recommendations, let me know. Also, the one by Jacqueline Hagan, I think it's the Wilk... God, I always get the name mixed up. But it's the Jacqueline Hagan one, and I do want to read that, hopefully, either this year or sometime this year. I don't know when that's going to be, but hopefully I'll do it. Yeah. Thrice was good, and thank you, Andrew, for giving me the copy as well. I might have Andrew on as well to talk about Thrice, but we'll see about that. There's a bunch of stuff I want to do that's kind of gone up in the air as of the moment. Podcasting, how did that go? Went pretty well for the most part. I didn't really watch a lot of TV or anything during January. I was kind of busy with other things, and also I was really consumed with reading a bunch. So yeah, just hasn't really been a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, January was a good month. February, what's going on right now? February should be fun. I don't expect to read as many books as I do in January because generally February is a slow month for me because I tend to get busy and I don't read quite as much. Also, February is just a really short month. Though I am reading some stuff right now. I am doing a read along, which was kind of an accident, but I'm doing a read along with Kindle and Kicks. Darko, cool guy, friend of the channel. You should check him out. He just hit 100 subscribers. Well, I'll save the stuff I read for what I read in February, so I won't get into that. But I think that is all I have for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to check me out on any other social media, I'm on Twitter. I'm also on Goodreads and Letterboxd, where I do reviews that are probably more coherent than the one you just heard right now. You can also find me on Discord if you want to come talk to me. Also, if you will, like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. As my buddy John likes to say, it feels good to do it. So, yeah, that's all I got for today. Until next time.